I want to speak to you today on a very important subject. You will never forget what I speak tonight. Now, I've never said that about a message, but God has given me a word. You'll never forget what I say to you this night. I want to talk to you about the second voice. The second voice. Now, the Bible says in first, and I am going to paraphrase most of these verses so we can get to all of them, so they won't be appearing on the screen. But trust me, I'm not going to tell you something that's not there. In 1 Corinthians 14:10, the Bible says, there are many kinds of voices, and none of them are without significance. All kinds of voices. You have voices among the people. You have voices out of heaven. You have voices in other languages. All kind of voices. But I want to take and just talk about two voices. Two voices. I'm going to talk to you about the first voice and the second voice. And we begin, let's take a look, and I speak it to you. Matthew, the 10th chapter, about the 17th verse. Beware of men, for they will bring you before governors and kings for my sake, to give a testimony of me to them, and to the Gentiles. Do not give it a second thought. Do not give it a second thought. When God speaks, you don't need a second thought. Now, watch with me, please. It says it's going to be the Spirit that speaks out of you is what that verse says. Now, the second voice we see in Matthew. Matthew 16 says, Jesus says to his disciples, I must go to Jerusalem and be killed and rise again the third day. Then Peter began to rebuke Jesus and say, far is it from thee, you will not have that happen to you. And Jesus turns and says, get behind me, Satan. Second voice. There'll always be two voices when God speaks. There will be the first voice that says up, and there'll be a second voice that says down. There'll be a first voice that says go, and another voice will say stay. One of them is the voice of God. And every time the voice of God speaks, there will be a second voice. You will never, ever hear God's voice without him bringing a second voice to try to draw you in another direction than what God's trying to bring you in. Now, please notice this with me. If you don't hear the second voice, it probably wasn't God in the first voice. Because whenever he speaks, the second voice comes, bang, and he begins immediately to tell you, don't do what God said, here's a better way. Reasoning comes in, all kind of forms the second voice takes. But the entire, this is a thought that probably never crosses our mind, but the entire human race fell into the lost condition that we're in, into the corrupt situation that men find themselves today. It all came from the second voice. It all came from the second voice. The first voice that was heard, God was walking in the garden. And God said, he said, now, I want you to eat anything you want here, but of the tree, of the fruit, of the knowledge of good and evil, don't touch it, don't eat it, because when you do, you will die. First voice, you eat it and you'll die. Second voice immediately shows up in the next chapter, and it says, listen, did God say you can't eat from that tree? All he's going to do is try to keep you from becoming a god. Go ahead and eat from the tree, and it'll be okay. You will be gods. First voice, don't eat from the tree. Second voice, go ahead and eat from the tree. Notice something, please. He said, you will be as gods. How did he fall? He said, I will be as the Most High God. He knew it worked with him, so he figured it would work with Eve, and he figured right. The second voice, the situation that you were in before you met Jesus Christ, the situation that the world finds it in today, it all came about by a second voice that spoke after God told Eve not to eat from that forbidden fruit. Does anybody understand what I'm saying? By the way, you've all heard the first voice. And every one of you, a time or many more in your life, you've heard the second voice. He continuously speaks when God speaks. The time I was making a decision to become a Christian, it was in my heart. But everything, second voice. You better not do it. You won't be able to stay in the business with your daddy. There's going to be all kind of ramifications. But then I made the good decision not to listen to the second voice, but I listened to the first voice, and I became a child of God and left that realm of the lost. Now, are you getting a little idea of what I'm saying? you will never forget what I'm speaking to you today. It's been happening to you, but you haven't labeled it yet. But from this day on, when that second voice speaks, you will know that's the second voice. Wait a minute. God must have just spoken. Yes, Lord. No, I'm not going to do that the way you want me to do it, devil.